The scorching Arizona sun hung like a molten gold coin in the sky as Kathleen Collins wiped sweat from her brow and surveyed the dusty main street of Rattlesnake Ridge. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old, she'd already weathered more hardship than most twice her age. Her father's hardware store was all she had left of him, and even that was hanging by a thread. Kathleen Katie, to the few folks she considered friends, pulled her cotton sleeve across her forehead and stepped back inside the shop. The bell jingled above the door, a cheerful sound at odds with her grim circumstances. The shelves that had once been stocked with everything from hammers to lanterns now stood half empty, a testament to her dwindling fortunes. Miss Collins, Sheriff Thomas appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grim beneath his gray mustache. Thought you might want to know the bank's given notice. They're calling in your father's loan in 30 days. Katie's stomach dropped. 30 days? That's impossible. We had an agreement. Bank's got a new owner. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Eastern fella. All business, no sentiment. I see. Katie squared her shoulders, though inside she was crumbling. Thank you for telling me. After the sheriff left, she leaned against the counter, mind racing. 30 days to come up with $300 might as well ask her to rope the moon. She'd been struggling just to keep food on the table since her father's death 6 months ago. The bell jingled again, and Katie straightened, forcing a shopkeeper's smile. The man who ducked through the doorway was a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. Trail dust clung to his denim pants and cotton shirt, and a worn leather holster hung at his hip. Not a local, but definitely a man accustomed to life on the frontier. "Afternoon, madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair in need of a trim. "Hope you might have some supplies I'm in need of." "We'll certainly try, mister," Katie prompted. "Novak. Jacob Novak. Jake to most." He offered a smile that softened the hard angles of his face. "Mr. Novak, what can I help you with today?" Jake listed several items: ammunition, jerky, coffee, and other trail necessities. As Katie gathered them, she couldn't help noticing how his eyes took in the sparse shelves and dusty corners of the store. "Business looks a mite slow," he observed. Katie stiffened. "We're managing just fine. No offense meant, madam." He placed a gold coin on the counter, far more than his purchases were worth. "Keep the change. I don't need charity, Mr. Novak." Katie pushed the coin back toward him. Jake's eyebrow lifted. "Not charity. Just don't have use for small coins on the trail. Too noisy." Their fingers brushed as she reluctantly took the money, and Katie felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. Ridiculous. She had no time for such foolishness, not with the bank breathing down her neck. "You're new to Rattlesnake Ridge," she said, changing the subject as she wrapped his purchases in brown paper. "Just passing through." Jake tied the package to his belt. "Heading north to Copper Canyon." Katie's pulse quickened. "The mining territory?" "That's right. Word is there's a new vein discovered." "Rich one." "Is that so?" She tried to sound casual, though her mind was racing. A rich vein could mean miners needing supplies, lots of them. If she could establish a supply route to Copper Canyon, perhaps she could save the store. Jake studied her with those storm cloud eyes. "You seem mighty interested in mining news for a hardware store owner." "My father always said a good merchant stays informed." Katie handed him his change, considerably less than he'd tried to give her. "Safe travels, Mr. Novak." He touched the brim of his hat. "Madam." After he left, Katie stared at the door, an idea taking shape. Copper Canyon was a 4-day ride. Dangerous country, especially for a woman alone. But what choice did she have? 30 days until she lost everything. The next morning found her at the livery stable before dawn, dressed in her father's old riding clothes, her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "You can't be serious, Miss Collins," said Elmer, the aging stable owner, as she saddled her father's mare. "That's bandit country between here and Copper Canyon." "I'm aware of the risks," Katie replied, checking the cinch. "But I need to speak with the mine operators about a supply contract. At least wait for the mail coach. It won't come for another week. I don't have time to waste." She mounted up, adjusting her father's old rifle in its scabbard. "I'll be back in 10 days, Elmer. If anyone asks, I've gone to visit my aunt in Tucson." The old man shook his head but didn't try to stop her as she rode out of town, the rising sun casting long shadows across the desert floor. By midday, Katie was questioning her decision. The June heat was brutal, and the water in her canteen was already half gone. The trail to Copper Canyon wound through red rock formations and sparse juniper trees, offering little shade. Still, she pressed on, determined. She made camp that evening in a small arroyo, building a tiny fire to cook a meager supper of beans and hard biscuits. As darkness fell, the desert came alive with sounds: the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of nighttime creatures. Katie kept her rifle close, fighting against the creeping fear of being alone in such vastness. Sleep came fitfully, and she woke at dawn stiff and unrest. As she saddled her horse, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Heart pounding, she grabbed her rifle, taking cover behind a boulder. A lone rider appeared, leading a pack mule. Even at a distance, she recognized the broad shoulders and easy seat of Jacob Novak. "You can come out now, Miss Collins," he called, bringing his horse to a halt. "Unless you're planning to shoot me." Embarrassed, Katie emerged from hiding. "How did you know I was here?" Jake dismounted, his expression somewhere between amused and concerned. "Wasn't hard to follow your trail. You're not exactly an experienced frontiersman. I don't recall asking for your tracking services, Mr. Novak." "No, you didn't." He unsaddled his horse with practiced movements. "But when Elmer told me a young woman had ridden out alone toward Copper Canyon, I figured someone ought to make sure you don't get yourself killed." Katie bristled. "I'm perfectly capable of getting robbed, shot, or worse." Jake interrupted, his voice hardening. "These trails are crawling with outlaws, Miss Collins. Men who haven't seen a woman in months." The blunt assessment sent a chill through her, but Katie held her ground. "I have no choice. In 30 days, I lose my father's store unless I can secure a supply contract with the mines." Jake studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Well, since we're headed the same way, might as well travel together. Safety in numbers. I don't need a protector, Mr. Novak. And I don't need the guilt of riding on knowing you're likely to run into trouble." He began preparing coffee over her dying fire. "Besides, I know the trail better than you do. Could save you a day's ride." Katie wanted to refuse, to prove she could manage on her own. But practicality won out over pride. "Very well. But I'll pull my own weight. Wouldn't expect otherwise." Jake handed her a tin cup of coffee, stronger and better than her own. "And it's Jake. If we're riding together, might as well use my name. Then you should call me Katie." They struck camp efficiently, Jake offering quiet suggestions rather than commands, which Katie appreciated. As they rode, she found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. There was something reassuring about his presence: the confident way he sat his horse, the alertness in his gaze as he scanned the horizon. "You've been to Copper Canyon before?" she asked as they navigated a rocky pass. "A few times. Last visit was 6 months back. And there's truly gold there." Jake nodded. "Gold, silver, copper. The mountains are full of it. Problem is getting it out. That's why I think a steady supply line could be profitable." Katie explained her plan to establish a regular route from Rattlesnake Ridge to the mining camps. "If I can secure contracts with even a few operations, it might be enough to save the store." "It's not a bad plan," Jake admitted, "though the competition will be fierce. Several outfits from larger towns are already established. But can they match my prices? I'm willing to work on narrower margins." Jake glanced at her with newfound respect. "You know your business, Katie Collins. My father taught me well." A familiar pang of grief tightened her chest. The store was his life's work. "I can't let it go without a fight." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to the endless desert sky. By late afternoon, they'd covered more ground than Katie had managed the entire previous day. "There's a water hole about a mile ahead," Jake said as the sun began its descent. "Good place to make camp." The water hole turned out to be a small spring feeding into a rocky basin, surrounded by cottonwood trees, a green oasis in the red desert. While Jake tended the horses, Katie gathered wood for a fire, determined to contribute equally to their partnership. As darkness fell, they shared a meal of jerky, beans, and biscuits. Jake produced a small flask of whiskey, offering it to Katie. "Just a sip," he said. "Keeps the night chill away." Katie hesitated, then accepted. The liquor burned her throat, but spread warmth through her chest. "Thank you. You're not what I expected." Jake said after a moment. What did you expect? A proper shopkeeper's daughter, I suppose. Not someone who'd ride out alone into dangerous territory to save her business. Katie smiled slightly. My father raised me to be practical above all else. And there was nothing practical about waiting in Rattlesnake Ridge for the bank to take everything. What about your mother? She died when I was 10. Influenza. Katie poked at the fire with a stick. My father never remarried. It was just the two of us until last winter. Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. Lost my own father 2 years back. Mother before that. You have siblings? A brother in Denver. Lawyer. There was something in Jake's tone, not quite resentment, but a complexity Katie couldn't decipher. We don't see much of each other these days. And that's why you're out here? Searching for gold in Copper Canyon. Jake took another sip from his flask. Something like that. Katie sensed there was more to his story, but he clearly wasn't ready to share it. She respected his privacy and changed the subject. How much farther to the canyon? 2 more days if the weather holds. Jake glanced at the sky. Though those clouds to the west worry me. Might be in for some rain. They bedded down on opposite sides of the fire, Jake insisting on taking the first watch. Get some sleep, he told her. I'll wake you in a few hours. Despite her exhaustion, Katie found it difficult to fall asleep. Her mind kept returning to the problem of the bank loan, calculating figures and possibilities. And beneath those practical concerns lay a more unsettling awareness of the man sitting across the fire, his quiet strength, the way his eyes crinkled when he almost smiled. She must have dozed off eventually, because she woke to Jake gently shaking her shoulder. Your turn to watch, he said softly. Sun'll be up in about 3 hours. Katie sat up, reaching for her rifle. Anything I should be concerned about? Heard some coyotes to the north, but they kept their distance. Jake settled onto his bedroll. Wake me if you hear anything unusual. The night was peaceful, stars brilliant in the vast sky. Katie found herself wondering about Jake's past, what had brought a man like him to this nomadic existence. He didn't have the desperate look of most gold seekers she'd encountered. There was purpose in his movements, a steady confidence that spoke of a man who knew his own mind. At dawn, they broke camp efficiently and continued their journey. The terrain grew more rugged as they approached Copper Canyon, the trail winding through towering red cliffs and deep ravines. By midday, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air felt heavy with impending rain. We should find shelter, Jake said, eyeing the sky. Desert storms can turn nasty quick. They diverted to a narrow side canyon, where Jake knew of a shallow cave. They'd barely reached it when the skies opened, rain coming down in sheets. Thunder rolled through the canyon, and lightning split the sky. Just in time, Jake commented as they led the horses under the rocky overhang. The space was tight, forcing them to stand close together as they watched the deluge. Will this delay us much? Katie asked, concerned about her timeline. Depends. These storms sometimes pass quickly. Other times. He shrugged. Nothing to do but wait it out. The rain intensified, creating a curtain of water at the mouth of their shelter. A sudden gust of wind drove the cold droplets inward, soaking Katie's shirt. She shivered involuntarily. Here. Jake shrugged out of his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The wool was warm from his body, carrying his scent leather, tobacco, and something distinctly masculine. Thank you. Katie pulled it closer, acutely aware of his proximity in the confined space. You should change into something dry when you can, he said, pointedly looking away to give her privacy. Cold, and what is a bad combination out here? Katie rummaged in her saddlebag for her spare shirt, then hesitated. Could you? I'll check on the horses. Jake moved deeper into the cave, his back to her. Katie changed quickly, grateful for the dry fabric against her skin. Jake's coat enveloped her like a protective embrace, far too large, but comforting nonetheless. All decent? He called after a few minutes. Yes, thank you. The storm showed no signs of abating. Jake built a small fire near the cave entrance, using the minimal dry wood they had. They sat side by side, watching the rain and sharing the jerky and hard biscuits that comprised their lunch. Tell me about Rattlesnake Ridge, Jake said, breaking the comfortable silence. You've lived there all your life? Katie nodded. Born and raised. It's not much, compared to bigger towns, but it's home. And your father's store, was it always struggling? No, not until the silver mines closed 2 years ago. Katie sighed. Most of our business came from the miners. When they left, so did our income. My father took out a loan to keep us afloat, hoping things would improve. Then he caught pneumonia last winter. She trailed off, the memory still raw. Jake didn't press, just waited quietly for her to continue. After he died, I tried to renegotiate the loan terms, but the bank manager was sympathetic without being helpful. Now there's a new owner, and he's called in the debt. 30 days to find $300, Jake mused. That's a tall order. Hence my journey to Copper Canyon. Katie attempted a smile. Not exactly the conventional path for a hardware store proprietress. Nothing about you strikes me as conventional, Katie Collins. There was warmth in Jake's voice that made her heart beat a little faster. The storm raged through the afternoon, trapping them in their rocky shelter. They talked easily, sharing stories of their lives. Jake spoke of his time as a cavalry scout during the closing years of the Civil War, though he skimmed over the details. Katie told him about growing up in the small frontier town, learning the hardware business at her father's side. My mother wanted me to be a proper lady, she admitted with a small laugh. She was horrified when I preferred inventory lists to embroidery. And yet you seem perfectly capable of both, Jake observed. I noticed your mending kit is quite comprehensive. Katie raised an eyebrow. A woman can be practical and still appreciate fine needlework, Mr. Novak. Jake, he reminded her gently. Jake, she corrected, liking the way his name felt on her lips. As evening approached, the rain finally began to subside. They ventured out to assess their surroundings. The desert had been transformed, dry washes now flowing with muddy water, the air washed clean and sweet-smelling. We'll have to wait until morning, Jake said, surveying the flooded trail. Too dangerous to navigate those washes in the dark. They made a proper camp, grateful for the opportunity to stretch out after the confines of the cave. Jake managed to shoot a rabbit, which made a welcome change from their trail rations. As they ate, Katie found herself watching the firelight play across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow. How did you get that? She asked, gesturing to the scar. Jake's fingers touched it reflexively. Bar fight in Dodge City. Man accused me of cheating at cards. Were you? A smile tugged at his mouth. No, madam. But he was too drunk to be convinced otherwise. You've lived quite a life. Just different from yours. Not necessarily better. Katie considered this. Do you ever think about settling down? Finding a place to call home. Something flickered in Jake's eyes, longing, perhaps, or regret. Sometimes. But a man needs something to offer before he can think about putting down roots. Is that why you're chasing gold? Partly. Jake stoked the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. Though I'm not fool enough to think fortune comes easy. I've seen too many men lose themselves in the hunt. Yet here you are, heading to Copper Canyon. Jake met her gaze steadily. I have my reasons. The intensity in his eyes made Katie look away, suddenly flustered. They finished their meal in companionable silence, and when it came time to sleep, Katie found herself reluctant to end the day. I'll take first watch, Jake offered. Wake me halfway through, Katie insisted. You need rest too. He nodded, settling against a boulder with his rifle across his knees. Katie lay on her bedroll, watching the stars appear one by one in the clearing sky. Despite the day's delays, she felt strangely content. It had been a long time since she'd simply talked with someone, sharing thoughts and stories without the weight of her responsibilities pressing down. With that comforting thought, she drifted into sleep. Morning brought clear skies and the challenge of navigating the mud-slick trails. They made slower progress than hoped, forced to detour around flooded washes and unstable ground. By midday, Katie's earlier optimism had faded, replaced by growing anxiety about her timeline. We're still on track, Jake assured her, reading her expression. The trail improves beyond that ridge. He was right. By afternoon, they'd made up much of their lost time, and the first signs of mining activity became visible: abandoned equipment, the occasional weathered claim marker. As they rounded a bend in the canyon, Katie caught her breath at the sight that greeted them. Copper Canyon spread before them, a sprawling collection of tents, rough cabins, and mining operations scattered along the canyon floor and up its walls. Steam rose from stamp mills, and the distant clang of metal on stone echoed through the air. Hundreds of men moved about like ants, working claims and carrying equipment. It's bigger than I imagined, Katie said, taking in the bustling scene. Doubled in size since I was here last. Jake agreed, looking surprised. News of the strike must have spread far. They rode into the settlement, attracting curious glances. A woman was still an uncommon sight in mining camps, and Katie felt the weight of stares. Jake moved his horse closer to hers, a protective gesture she found surprisingly welcome. They stopped at a large tent marked a Sayer's office, which seemed to function as the camp's administrative center. As Katie dismounted, Jake leaned close. "Let me do the talking first," he murmured. "These men respect strength. If they think you're uncertain, they'll dismiss you outright." Katie nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his advice, though it chafed at her independence. Inside the tent, a thin man with spectacles looked up from a scale where he was weighing gold dust. "Well now, what have we here? Don't often see a lady in these parts." "Miss Collins is a business owner from Rattlesnake Ridge," Jake said, his voice carrying an authority Katie hadn't heard before. "She's here to discuss supply contracts with the mine operators." The assayer raised his eyebrows. "Is that so? Well, miss, you've come at an interesting time. Canyon's booming 3 new strikes in the last month. Men pouring in from all over. Then they'll need supplies," Katie said confidently. "Tools, provisions, equipment, all things my store can provide at competitive rates." The man studied her with new interest. "You'll want to speak with Mr. Hargrove. He coordinates purchasing for the larger operations." He gestured toward a sturdy cabin on the hillside. "Up there, though he might be at the Golden Nugget this time of day." They thanked him and stepped back outside. "The Golden Nugget?" Katie asked. Jake nodded toward a large canvas structure from which piano music and raucous laughter emanated. "Saloon. Not exactly a proper place for a lady, but business rarely confines itself to proper places," Katie finished. "Let's go." Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but simply offered his arm instead. "Stay close." The Golden Nugget was everything Katie had imagined a mining camp saloon to be: loud, smoky, and crowded with unwashed men spending their hard-earned gold on whiskey and games of chance. Conversations faltered as they entered, dozens of eyes turning their way. Jake guided her through the room with a hand at the small of her back. "Looking for Hargrove," he announced to the barkeeper, a burly man with a magnificent mustache. "Corner table," the man replied, jerking his thumb while openly appraising Katie. Benjamin Hargrove proved to be a middle-aged man with shrewd eyes and an impressive beard. He listened to Katie's proposal with unexpected attention, asking pointed questions about pricing, delivery schedules, and payment terms. "You've thought this through," he acknowledged when she finished. "But I've already got supply arrangements with Porter's outfit from Tucson." "Porter charges 20% above market for hardware," Katie countered. "I can offer 15% below his rates, with monthly deliveries." Hargrove's eyebrows rose. "That's a bold claim, Miss Collins. How do I know you can deliver? My father ran Collins Hardware for 20 years. We have established relationships with wholesalers in Santa Fe and Tucson." Katie removed a folded paper from her pocket, a price list she'd prepared before leaving. "These are my rates. Compare them to Porter's." Jake watched silently as Hargrove studied the list, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, the man looked up. "I'm interested, but I'll need to see samples of your goods." "I can return with samples in 2 weeks," Katie offered. "Make it 10 days. Porter's wagon is due then, and I'd like to compare directly." Katie calculated quickly. 4 days back to Rattlesnake Ridge, 2 days to prepare, 4 days to return. It would be tight, but possible. Agreed. They shook hands, and Katie felt a surge of triumph. It wasn't a contract yet, but it was a foot in the door. As they left the saloon, Jake touched her elbow. "Well done," he said quietly. "You impressed him." "It's just a meeting, not a guarantee." Katie tempered her excitement with caution. "Hargrove doesn't waste time on possibilities he doesn't believe in." Jake steered her toward a small eatery. "Come on. That calls for a proper meal." Over bowls of surprisingly good stew, they discussed the next steps. Katie would need to prepare carefully, selecting the right sample items, calculating costs down to the penny. Jake listened attentively, offering occasional suggestions. "You know a great deal about business for a prospector," Katie observed. Something flashed in Jake's eyes. "My father was a merchant in St. Louis. I grew up in the trade before the war changed everything. Yet you chose this life instead." Sometimes choices are made for us. Jake's tone suggested the subject was closed. They found lodging for the night, Jake in the miner's bunkhouse, Katie in the small room behind the assayer's office that he occasionally rented to visitors. Before they parted, Jake hesitated. I should continue my business here tomorrow, he said. But I'll escort you back to Rattlesnake Ridge when you're ready. Katie was surprised by the offer and by how much she wanted to accept it. Your prospecting can wait a few days. His eyes held hers. The trail's too dangerous for you alone, Katie. She should have bristled at the implication that she couldn't manage on her own. Instead, she found herself nodding. Thank you. I appreciate the company. Jake's smile was brief but genuine. Get some rest. We'll meet at sunrise. Katie spent the next day meeting with smaller mine operators, securing tentative agreements contingent on Hargrove's approval. By evening, she had potential contracts that could triple her store's monthly income if she could deliver as promised. Jake was waiting when she returned to the assayer's office, deep in conversation with a weathered old miner. They broke off as she approached. Katie, Jake greeted her. This is Silas McGee. He's been working these mountains for 30 years. The old man tipped his hat. Miss Collins, your friend here says you're quite the businesswoman. Katie smiled. Just trying to save my father's store, Mr. McGee. Well, if you're bringing supplies up this way, include extra blasting powder. Can't get enough of it with all the new diggings. I'll make a note of it, Katie promised. We plan to head back to Rattlesnake Ridge tomorrow. Best way today, Silas advised, glancing at the sky. Word is there's trouble on the South Trail. Stage got held up yesterday, Riley gang, most likely. Jake frowned. Where exactly? Scorpion Pass. Driver was shot. 2 passengers robbed of everything. Katie felt a chill. They'd passed through Scorpion Pass on their journey here. Is there another route? She asked. Could go west to Coyote Flats, then south, Silas suggested. Adds a day, but safer. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Might be wise. They thanked Silas for the information and walked toward the cookhouse for dinner. We'll leave the day after tomorrow, Jake decided. Take the western route. I don't have time to spare, Katie argued. The bank's deadline won't matter if you're robbed or worse, Jake cut in. 1 extra day won't break your timeline. She wanted to protest, but knew he was right. They ate in silence, both preoccupied with their thoughts. As they finished, a commotion outside drew their attention. A group of riders had entered the camp, their horses lathered from hard riding. At their center was a man whose bearing marked him as their leader, tall and expensively dressed, with a silver-handled revolver at his hip. Who's that? Katie asked the cook. Vincent Mercer, the man replied, his expression souring. Owns the Copperhead Mine, richest strike in the canyon, and about half the claims around it. Jake had gone very still, his eyes fixed on the newcomer with an intensity that made Katie uneasy. You know him? She asked softly. We've met. Jake's voice was tight. He's the reason I came to Copper Canyon. Before Katie could question him further, Mercer's group dismounted in front of the assayer's office. The well-dressed man issued orders to his companions, then turned his gaze falling directly on Jake and Katie. A smile spread across his face, cold and calculating. Well, Jacob Novak. Mercer approached their table. I heard rumors you were in the canyon. Jake stood slowly. Mercer. The tension between the men was palpable. Katie rose as well, instinctively moving closer to Jake. Aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely companion? Mercer asked, his eyes traveling over Katie in a way that made her skin crawl. Miss Collins is a businesswoman from Rattlesnake Ridge, Jake said flatly. Here to arrange supply contracts. Is that so? Mercer's smile widened. Well, Miss Collins, you should know that I control most of the purchasing in this camp. Any contracts would need my approval. Katie frowned. Mr. Hargrove indicated he had authority. Hargrove works for me. Mercer interrupted. As do most men in this canyon. Jake's hand had drifted closer to his holster. Katie has legitimate business here, Mercer. Business that doesn't concern you. Everything in Copper Canyon concerns me. Mercer's genial tone hardened. You'd do well to remember that, Novak. He tipped his hat to Katie. Miss Collins, I'd be happy to discuss your proposal tomorrow. My office, 10 o'clock. With that, he sauntered away, his men following like obedient dogs. What was that about? Katie demanded once they were alone. And don't tell me it was nothing. I saw your face. Jake's jaw worked as he struggled with some internal debate. Finally, he sighed. Let's walk. They left the cookhouse, strolling to the edge of the settlement where they could speak privately. The evening air had cooled, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. 2 years ago, I owned a successful freight business in Denver, Jake began. My brother and I built it from nothing after the war. We had contracts with mining operations throughout Colorado and were expanding into Arizona territory. Katie listened, surprised by this glimpse into his past. Vincent Mercer approached us with a proposal of partnership to develop new mines in Copper Canyon. He had maps, samples, convincing reports from geologists. Jake's voice had gone flat. My brother thought it was too good to be true. I disagreed. What happened? I invested everything our company funds, my personal savings, even mortgaged our equipment. $30,000. Jake's hands clenched. A week later, Mercer disappeared. The geological reports were forgeries. The samples had been salted with gold from elsewhere. Katie's heart sank. He swindled you. Completely. Jake's laugh was bitter. My brother never forgave me. Our business collapsed. He salvaged what he could and became a lawyer. I've been tracking Mercer ever since. That's why you're really here, Katie realized. Not for gold, but for him. Jake nodded, his expression grim in the fading light. I followed rumors for months. When I heard he'd struck it rich in Copper Canyon, I knew it was my chance. Chance for what? Revenge. Justice. Jake's eyes met hers. He stole everything I'd worked for. Everything my brother and I built. Katie processed this revelation. The man she'd been traveling with wasn't simply a prospector, he was on a mission of retribution. What do you plan to do? Get proof of his swindling. There must be others he's cheated. With enough evidence, the territorial marshal could bring charges. And if that doesn't work? Jake didn't answer directly. You should meet with him tomorrow. If he controls the purchasing, you need his approval for your contracts. After what you've told me, he's a criminal, Jake. He's also a businessman. If your offer makes financial sense, he'll consider it regardless of his history with me. Jake touched her arm gently. This is your chance to save your store. Don't let my quarrel with Mercer jeopardize that. Katie wasn't convinced, but she recognized the logic. And what will you be doing while I'm meeting with him? Asking questions around camp. Someone here must know something that could help build a case against him. They returned to the settlement in thoughtful silence. At the door to her rented room, Katie hesitated. Be careful, Jake. Men like Mercer don't appreciate being investigated. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I've survived worse. Katie slept poorly that night, troubled by what she'd learned. Jake's revelation cast their journey in a new light. He'd been using her business trip as cover for his own agenda. Yet he'd also protected her, taught her, and shown genuine interest in her success. The contradiction was difficult to reconcile. Morning brought no clarity. Katie dressed carefully for her meeting with Mercer, choosing her most businesslike attire, a simple blouse and skirt that had belonged to her mother, kept for special occasions. She pinned her hair severely and reviewed her notes one last time. Jake was waiting outside, looking as though he hadn't slept either. You don't have to do this, he said as they walked toward Mercer's office, a substantial cabin on the hillside overlooking the camp. Yes, I do. Katie squared her shoulders. But I'll be careful. Vincent Mercer received her in an office that spoke of prosperity, solid furniture, a Persian rug, even glass in the windows. Jake remained outside, his expression unreadable as the door closed between them. Miss Collins, Mercer gestured to a chair. Please sit. Coffee. Katie declined politely, determined to keep the meeting professional. She presented her proposal succinctly: competitive pricing, reliable delivery schedules, quality merchandise. Mercer listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed a sharp business mind. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with those calculating eyes. Your proposal has merit, he admitted, though I wonder about your ability to fulfill such substantial orders. Rattlesnake Ridge is hardly a commercial center. I have arrangements with wholesalers in Tucson and Santa Fe, Katie replied, and transportation partners for larger shipments. Impressive for a young woman operating alone. Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. Your father's death must have been a significant setback. Katie stiffened. She hadn't mentioned her father. You seem well informed about my circumstances, Mr. Mercer. I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. He leaned forward. Including your traveling companion, Mr. Novak. Warning bells sounded in Katie's mind. Mr. Novak has been kind enough to escort me through dangerous territory. Our association is purely practical. Is it? Mercer's voice was silky. He hasn't told you why he's really here, has he? Katie kept her expression neutral. Mr. Novak's business is his own. His business, Mercer said coldly, is attempting to destroy mine. The man has been spreading malicious rumors about me for over a year. I'm here to discuss supply contracts, Mr. Mercer, not personal vendettas. They're connected, Miss Collins. Mercer stood, moving to a cabinet where he poured himself a drink. Novak blames me for his business failures because he can't accept his own incompetence. He made poor investments, trusted the wrong people, none of which was my responsibility. Katie remained silent, unwilling to reveal what Jake had told her. I'm concerned that your association with him might cloud your judgment, Mercer continued, and the judgment of those considering doing business with you. The threat was thinly veiled. Katie felt anger rising but kept her voice steady. Are you suggesting my contracts depend on disassociating from Mr. Novak? Mercer smiled. I'm suggesting that in business, we're judged by the company we keep. And Jacob Novak is not a man who inspires confidence in Copper Canyon. Katie stood, gathering her papers. Thank you for your time, Mr. Mercer. I'll await your decision on my proposal. One moment. Mercer moved to block her path to the door. I haven't made my position clear. I control purchasing for every major operation in this canyon. Without my approval, you have no contracts. Then I'll deal with the independent miners, Katie replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. The same independents who rely on my mills to process their or my store for their supplies. Mercer laughed softly. Be reasonable, Miss Collins. I'm offering you a choice profitable contracts that will save your father's store or continued loyalty to a man who's using you for his own ends. Katie felt ice in her veins. Using me? Why do you think he was so eager to accompany you here? He needed a reason to return to Copper Canyon without arousing suspicion. Mercer's expression was triumphant. He saw an opportunity in your desperation and exploited it. The words hit dangerously close to Katie's own doubts. Had Jake been sincere in his concern for her safety, or merely using her as cover for his vendetta? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the man before her. I'll consider your position, Mr. Mercer. She kept her voice neutral. When do you need my answer? Tonight. He stepped aside, allowing her to reach the door. I'm hosting a gathering at my home for business associates. 8 o'clock. Come alone, with your decision. Katie nodded stiffly and left, her mind whirling. Outside, Jake straightened from where he'd been leaning against the porch railing. How did it go? He asked, searching her face. Not here, Katie murmured, conscious of curious eyes. They walked in silence until they reached a quiet spot near the stream that ran through the canyon. He knows why you're here, she said without preamble. And he's made it clear that my contracts depend on ending my association with you. Jake's expression hardened. Did he threaten you? Not directly. He simply pointed out his control over business in the canyon. Katie ran a hand over her face. He wants my answer tonight, at some gathering he's hosting. You're not going alone, Jake said immediately. He specifically said to come alone. I don't care what he said. Mercer is dangerous, Katie. So is losing my father's store. She met his gaze steadily. I need these contracts, Jake. Even if it means playing into his hands. Even if it means, he stopped abruptly. Even if it means betraying you. Katie finished softly. Is that what you think I'd do? Jake's expression softened. No, but I wouldn't blame you if you did. Your store, your father's legacy, that's more important than my quarrel with Mercer. It's not just a quarrel. He stole from you, destroyed your business. And I don't want him using you to get to me. Jake took her hands, his grip warm and strong. Listen to me, Katie. Take the contracts if he offers them. Disavow any connection to me if that's what it takes. Your future matters more. Katie stared at him, moved by his willingness to set aside his own quest. There has to be another way. They spent the afternoon discussing possibilities, weighing options. Katie met briefly with Hargrove, who confirmed Mercer's influence but seemed personally inclined to support her proposal. Several independent miners also expressed interest in direct supply arrangements, though their combined business wouldn't be enough to save the store. As evening approached, Katie made her decision. She would attend Mercer's gathering, hear his terms, but commit to nothing until she'd had time to consult with Jake. It was a delaying tactic at best, but it might buy them time to find leverage against Mercer. Jake was unhappy with the plan, but grudgingly accepted it. "At least let me accompany you to his house," he insisted. "I'll wait outside." Katie agreed, seeing the worry in his eyes. She changed into her best dress, a blue calico that had been her mother's, altered to fit her smaller frame. As she pinned up her hair, she caught herself wondering what Jake would think of her appearance, then scolded herself for the frivolous thought. Mercer's home stood apart from the main settlement, a substantial two-story structure with actual glass windows and a wraparound porch. Lights spilled from every window, and the sound of piano music and conversation drifted into the night. Several expensive horses were hitched outside, along with a fine carriage. "I'll be right here," Jake promised as they stopped at the edge of the property. "If you're not out in 2 hours, I'm coming in after you." Katie nodded, touched by his concern. On impulse, she reached up and straightened his collar. "Try not to start any gunfights while I'm gone." His smile was brief, but genuine. No promises. Mercer himself opened the door when she knocked, greeting her with exaggerated courtesy. "Miss Collins, I'm delighted you decided to join us." The house was impressively appointed for a mining camp, decent furniture, paintings on the walls, even carpets on the floors. A dozen or so guests mingled in the main room, mostly men in business attire, though Katie noted 2 expensively dressed women whom she guessed were wives of Mercer's associates. "Allow me to introduce you," Mercer said, guiding her through the room. Katie shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, noting that most of the guests were investors or merchants connected to the mining operations. Hargrove was notably absent. After the introductions, Mercer led her to a quiet corner. "I trust you've made your decision." "I'm still considering my options," Katie replied carefully. "Your offer is compelling, but I have other potential arrangements to weigh." Mercer's smile tightened. "I thought I made the situation clear this morning. There are no other viable arrangements in Copper Canyon. Perhaps, but I've had interest from independent operators. Independents who barely scrape by?" Mercer laughed. "Their combined business wouldn't cover your journey home, Miss Collins." A servant approached with champagne. Mercer took 2 glasses, offering one to Katie. "Let's be direct. I'll approve your contract's very favorable terms if you provide me with information about Novak's activities and intentions." Katie nearly choked on her champagne. "You want me to spy on him? I prefer to think of it as protecting your interests while helping me address a nuisance." Mercer's eyes had gone cold. "Novak is attempting to undermine my business with baseless accusations. I need to know what he's planning." "Mr. Novak has shared nothing of his plans with me," Katie lied. "Our association is merely one of convenience for travel. Come now, Miss Collins. I've seen how he looks at you. A man like Novak doesn't escort a woman through dangerous territory without developing attachments." Katie felt heat rise in her cheeks, partly from embarrassment, partly from anger at his insinuation. "You're mistaken." "Am I?" Mercer stepped closer. "Regardless, my offer stands. Information for contracts. Think carefully before refusing." A commotion at the front door interrupted them. Katie turned to see Jake standing in the entrance, his expression thunderous. Behind him was Benjamin Hargrove, looking equally grim. "What is the meaning of this?" Mercer demanded, moving forward. "Novak, you weren't invited." "Neither was I," Hargrove said, his voice carrying through the suddenly quiet room. "But when I heard you were planning to sabotage Miss Collins's business proposals, I thought I should intervene." Murmurs spread through the gathered guests. Jake's eyes found Katie's, silently questioning if she was all right. She gave a slight nod. "This is absurd," Mercer scoffed. "I've been negotiating fairly with Miss Collins." "Is blackmail your idea of fair negotiation?" Jake asked coldly. "Or using her to get to me?" Mercer's face darkened. "You have no business here, Novak. I suggest you leave before I have you removed." "I think we all have business here," said a new voice. A tall man in a marshal's badge stepped through the door behind Jake, especially when it concerns fraud and extortion. The room erupted in confused questions. Mercer's face had gone pale. "Marshal Davis, this is a private gathering, and this," the marshal held up a document, "is a warrant to examine your business records, Mercer. Signed by the territorial judge." Katie moved to Jake's side. "What's happening?" "Justice," he said quietly. "Hargrove has been gathering evidence of Mercer's swindling for months. When I arrived and started asking questions, he approached me. Hargrove nodded. Mercer's been running the same scheme for years. Find investors, take their money, disappear. Only this time, he actually struck real gold and decided to stay put, which made him vulnerable. Jake continued. Records can be found, witnesses can testify. The marshal was now presenting his credentials to the stunned guests. Mercer's face had transformed from shock to cold fury. This is your doing, he snarled at Jake. You'll regret this. His hand moved toward his jacket, and Katie saw the glint of metal. Jake, she cried in warning. Jake shoved her aside as Mercer drew a derringer from his coat. The small pistol cracked, the bullet splintering the doorframe where Jake had stood a moment before. Before Mercer could fire again, Jake tackled him, sending them both crashing into a table. The room dissolved into chaos, women screaming, men shouting, the marshal and his deputies trying to restore order. Katie found herself pressed against the wall, watching in horror as Jake and Mercer struggled for control of the small pistol. Another shot rang out, and both men went still. For one terrible moment, Katie thought Jake had been hit. Then Mercer slumped to the floor, blood spreading across his immaculate shirt. The derringer had discharged into his own chest during the struggle. The marshal rushed forward, checking Mercer's condition while his deputies secured the room. Jake stood slowly, his face grim but unhurt. His eyes sought Katie's across the chaotic space. She pushed through the crowd to reach him. Are you all right? Fine. His voice was rough. You? Shaken, but unharmed. She resisted the urge to touch him, to reassure herself he was truly unhurt. The marshal approached them, his expression grave. Mercer's alive, but badly wounded. I need statements from both of you about what happened here. The next hours passed in a blur of questions and explanations. Mercer was transported to the camp doctor, his prognosis uncertain. His guests were questioned and released, many of them potential victims of his schemes. Hargrove revealed the extent of evidence he'd gathered: falsified assay reports, double-booked claims, embezzled investor funds. By dawn, Katie was exhausted but relieved. The marshal had confirmed that her business proposals could proceed through Hargrove, who had legitimate authority despite Mercer's claims otherwise. Your contracts will be honored, Hargrove assured her as they left the marshal's temporary office. In fact, with Mercer likely facing prison, the mining operations will need reliable suppliers more than ever. Thank you, Katie said sincerely, for everything. Jake had been quiet throughout the proceedings, answering questions directly, but volunteering little. As they walked back toward the settlement in the gray morning light, Katie finally asked the question that had been troubling her. Did you know this would happen when you agreed to accompany me to Copper Canyon? Jake stopped walking, turning to face her. No, I knew Mercer was here, and I hoped to find evidence against him. But I never expected. He gestured vaguely toward the now distant house. That. Would you have told me the truth if I hadn't found out on my own? Eventually. Jake's eyes met hers, honest and troubled. I should have been straightforward from the beginning. I'm sorry, Katie. She studied him in the dawn light, this complex man who had protected her, supported her business ambitions, and risked his life to see justice done. Whatever his initial motivations for accompanying her, his actions had proven his character. We should get some rest, she said finally. We have a long journey back to Rattlesnake Ridge tomorrow. The return journey began the following day, taking the safer western route as planned. The atmosphere between them had shifted a new awareness, conversations that ran deeper than before. Jake spoke more openly about his past, his hopes for rebuilding some version of his former life, now that Mercer would face justice. Katie shared her plans for expanding the store, perhaps adding a postal service or telegraph office to increase revenue. Jake listened attentively, offering suggestions based on his business experience. They camped the third night near a small spring, the desert stretching endlessly around them. After dinner, they sat side by side watching the stars emerge. What will you do now? Katie asked. Return to Denver? Jake considered this. Eventually, perhaps. My brother and I need to really talk about what happened. But first I need to establish myself again, prove I can be trusted with responsibility. You have nothing to prove, Jake. You've done that already. He smiled faintly. Kind of you to say. A comfortable silence fell between them. Katie found herself acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his shoulder near hers. And you? Jake asked finally. Once your store is secure, what then? I haven't thought beyond saving it, Katie admitted. My whole life has been the store, especially since my father died. No thoughts of marriage? Family? The directness of the question surprised her. Someday, perhaps, if the right person came along. She glanced at him. What about you? I've been too focused on finding Mercer to consider it. Jake's voice softened. But lately, I've been thinking there might be more to life than vengeance or gold. The implication hung in the air between them. Katie felt her heart quicken, uncertain how to respond. Jake saved her from deciding by standing and stretching. We should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow. They reached Rattlesnake Ridge on the afternoon of the fourth day. The small town looked unchanged, yet Katie felt as though she were seeing it with new eyes. Her journey had transformed her in ways she was still discovering. Elmer at the livery stable was the first to greet them, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Miss Collins, started to worry when you were gone so long. We took a detour, Katie explained, dismounting. But we're back safe and sound. And successful? The old man asked hopefully. Katie nodded. Very. The store will be fine now. The news spread quickly through town. By evening, several townspeople had stopped by the store to welcome her home and hear about her adventure. Katie gave them the simplified version, leaving out the danger and drama of Mercer's downfall. Jake stayed in the background, helping her unload supplies and clean the dust-covered store. When the last visitor left, he closed the door behind them. You're quite the local celebrity, he observed with a small smile. Hardly. They're just surprised a woman managed to secure mining contracts. Katie hung her shawl on a peg. What about you? Will you stay in town tonight? If there's a room at the boarding house. Jake hesitated. I should move on tomorrow. There's a stagecoach to Tucson in the morning. Katie felt a pang of disappointment she couldn't quite hide. So soon. I need to send telegrams, arrange for my portion of Mercer's restitution when the case concludes. He met her eyes. But I could return, if there's reason to. The question behind his words was clear. Katie took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I think there might be. Reason to return, that is. Jake moved closer, his expression softening. Katie Collins, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met. Brave, intelligent, determined, stubborn, she added with a small smile. That too. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I came to Copper Canyon seeking justice. I never expected to find something far more valuable. Katie's heart was racing. And what was that? You. Jake's voice was low. Your courage, your compassion, they reminded me of the man I used to be, before bitterness consumed me. You were never consumed, Katie said softly. Not completely. A bitter man wouldn't have protected me, wouldn't have encouraged my business ambitions. Jake's hand cupped her cheek. May I call on you properly when I return? Court you as you deserve. Instead of answering, Katie closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. Jake responded immediately, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her closer. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a hunger that left them both breathless when they finally parted. I'll take that as a yes, Jake murmured, his forehead resting against hers. Katie laughed softly. A definite yes. He left the next morning as planned, but with promises to return within a month. Katie threw herself into preparing the store for its new role as supplier to the Copper Canyon mines. She ordered inventory, hired 2 assistants, and arranged for regular freight deliveries. True to his word, Jake returned 26 days later, not that Katie had been counting. He arrived with news that Mercer had survived his wounds only to face trial for multiple counts of fraud and attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming, ensuring he would spend years in prison. More importantly, Jake had settled his affairs in Denver and made peace with his brother. He had also purchased a half interest in a freight company operating between Tucson and the northern mining regions. The route passes right through Rattlesnake Ridge, he explained as they walked along the creek that evening. I'll be through town regularly. How regularly? Katie asked, trying to hide her disappointment that he wouldn't be staying permanently. At first, every 2 weeks or so. Jake took her hand, stopping their walk. But eventually, I hope to base the operation here. If that would meet with your approval. Katie's heart leaped. You want to stay in Rattlesnake Ridge? I want to be where you are, Jake said simply. These past weeks away from you have been difficult. For me as well, Katie admitted. Jake reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small leather pouch. I brought you something. Katie opened it curiously. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a small pendant, a perfectly formed gold nugget about the size of her thumbnail. It's beautiful, she breathed as Jake fastened it around her neck. From my first claim in Copper Canyon, he explained. Not enough to make a man rich, but I kept it as a reminder that real treasures aren't always what we expect them to be. Katie touched the pendant. Is that why you never sold it? Even when you needed money? Partly. Jake's fingers traced the line of her jaw. And partly because I was waiting for the right person to give it to. Their courtship progressed with a proper decorum that amused the townspeople, who had already decided they were perfectly matched. Jake established his freight office next door to Collins Hardware, and together they built a thriving business partnership that complemented their growing personal relationship. 4 months after his return, on a crisp autumn evening, Jake proposed properly down on one knee in the small garden behind Katie's house, the gold nugget pendant gleaming at her throat in the lantern light. I once thought finding gold would solve all my problems, he said, holding a simple ring with a small diamond. But I was searching for the wrong treasure. You showed me what truly matters, Katie Collins. Will you make me the happiest man in the territory and become my wife? Katie's eyes filled with tears as she pulled him to his feet. Yes, she whispered against his lips. With all my heart, yes. They were married in the spring of 1876, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with Jake's brother from Denver and business associates from as far away as Tucson and Santa Fe. The Collins Novak Mercantile Company, as they renamed the expanded store, became the cornerstone of Rattlesnake Ridge's growth. Their freight business connected the town to mining operations throughout the territory, bringing prosperity where there had been struggle. A year after their wedding, Katie gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Katie's mother. Jake proved to be a devoted father, as committed to his family as he was to their business ventures. On their second anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their new home watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Jake placed his arm around Katie's shoulders. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? He asked. If I hadn't walked into your store that day, if you hadn't decided to ride to Copper Canyon. Sometimes, Katie leaned against him, their daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. But then I remember something my father used to say, that the best things in life find us when we're busy making other plans. Jake chuckled. Wise man, your father. He would have liked you. Katie smiled up at him. Especially since you chose me over gold. Best decision I ever made. Jake kissed her gently. Gold comes and goes, but what we've built together, that's the real treasure. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, content in each other's company. The desert stretched before them, vast and mysterious, but no longer lonely. They had found in each other something more precious than all the gold in Copper Canyon, a love that would endure long after the last mine played out and the boomtowns faded into dust. In the years that followed, Rattlesnake Ridge grew into a prosperous town, with the Collins Novak Mercantile at its heart. Jake and Katie welcomed 2 more children's sons who inherited their father's adventurous spirit and their mother's determination. They faced challenges together: drought years, economic downturns, the changing landscape of the territory as it moved toward statehood. Through it all, the gold nugget pendant remained Katie's most treasured possession, a symbol of the journey that had brought them together and the love that had transformed them both. And on quiet evenings, they would sometimes sit together and remember those dangerous days in Copper Canyon, marveling at how the search for gold had led to the discovery of something infinitely more valuable, a love that truly was the greatest treasure of all.